And Mr. Williams, if you can go ahead and call this case for me.
Judge, we're now on the record in a two co-defendant case, starting with Mr. Minor Perez, warrant numbers 21W1594, 1955, 1596, 1597. I misread that's 1595 is the second of four warrants on this morning's calendar. Also before Your Honor is Mr. Rivera Venia. He is charged in warrant numbers 21.
I'm sorry, Mr. Williams. What warrant numbers do you have for Mr. Perez? I think they're different than the ones I have, so.
1594 through 1597.
Because that's not what I have. For Mr. Perez?
Pull that off.
So I have 21W00760, which is aggravated assault, 21W00761, aggravated assault, 21W00762, aggravated assault, 21W00763, armed robbery, and 21W00764, armed robbery. Mr. Lewis, do you have those same things? Okay. Mr. Williams, so I don't know which ones you have.
Judge, I'm not sure how to explain this. The state, I get two separate calendars. One is from you, one is a block calendar. They don't match up. I think Mr. Minor Perez has two separate files in my office. If
Mr. Jorstad?
Yes, ma'am, Your Honor. I might be able to explain this. This is the second preliminary hearing I've had on these subjects. The last hearing I was present for, as Mr. Estes said, I was not. That was for the 700 block of warrants that I testified to for about 3 hours last month. I believe all those charges were binded over, and that this hearing is for the 15 and 1600 block of warrants I took on these same suspects.
Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to.
It's okay. I know that was a long day.
What do you have? Mr. Estes, which cases do you show? Because our calendar shows the ones that I just read.
Judge, I think we dealt with the 700 block of warrants, and we still have the 1500 block of warrants to get to.
So Mr. Lewis shows the same ones that I show, though.
Judge, I think we dealt with the last time 005. Hold on. 1 second, Judge. Hold on. 760. Let me ask this, Scott. Is 760 the case with the van? Is that the van case? Okay, good. We dealt with 760, Judge.
Okay.
I mean, we heard the evidence. I don't remember if I did cross on that, but that's not all that important right now. We handled 546, which was the robbery of one person, through 556, which was the shooting at the police officer. And what I can tell the court is I don't have these other warrants from Mr. Minor Perez. So as long as the prosecutor tells me what the warrant numbers are, I mean, I'm assuming there's a third set of warrant numbers. I don't have this third set of warrant numbers, but as long as he tells me what they are, I'm ready.
Okay, and we don't have them either. So, Mr. Williams, I'll need you to tell me which ones you're referring to and the actual offense.
Right.
Can you?
Yes.
Tell me Mr. Perez again?
I can do that, Judge. That the state's ready to go forward on the following warrant numbers: 21W1594, alleging one count armed robbery.
Hold on, because I don't have it at all. I mean, I don't even have it listed as on his sheet. 1594?
1594.
Which I assume is 01594.
Yeah.
There's a
019. That's one robbery, okay.
You're going to have to go slow because I don't write fast. So.
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor.
Okay, go ahead.
The once you listen here backwards.
What is the 1594?
1594 is armed robbery.
Okay.
21W01955 alleges aggravated assault.
Hold on now, 1955?
I'm dyslexic, so I write things down in the wrong way.
Okay.
1595, I'm sorry.
1595, okay.
The third warrant is 21W01596.
Okay,
That's an armed robbery.
okay,
21W01597,
okay,
aggravated assault.
okay.
Those are the warrants that I'm aware of that still require a preliminary hearing.
Okay,
Okay.
for Mr. Perez.
On Mr. Perez, on Mr. Venia, is that you mean, Your Honor?
No, that was for Mr. Perez,
That was
right?
Mr. Perez, correct.
Okay. And for Mr. Venia?
I show 21W01598, armed robbery. Do you have that, Your Honor? Or is this
I do, I have that one.
Okay. 21W1599, aggravated assault. 21W01600, possession of firearm to the commission of a felony. 21W01601, armed robbery. 21W01602, aggravated assault. 21W01603, possession of a firearm to the commission of a felony. 21W01604, armed robbery. 21W01605, aggravated assault. 21W01606, armed robbery. And 21W01607, aggravated assault.
Okay, I have all those same.
And I have all those warrants as well, so I believe that's correct. And I'm sorry I didn't mean to misspeak regarding Investigator George said earlier.
Can you call your witness?
They cause Officer, I'm gonna say Jorstad, is that right?
Yes, sir.
All right. Officer Jorstad, we kindly raise your right hand and take an oath. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give to this court today shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Now, I didn't take my own advice here, but since we have an interpreter, keep in mind she's got to sort of translate, so go slow as we go, okay?
Yes, sir.
Did you swear out the warrants that we just covered with Her Honor?
Yes, sir, I did.
And those warrants are against a Guillermo Minor Perez
Yes, sir.
and a Leslie Rivera Venia?
Yes,
Do you see those two individuals on screen right now?
I do, in the green jumpsuits.
Is Mr. Minor Perez on screen with his attorney in the room?
Yes, he is.
And is Mr. Bonilla in a room by himself?
Yes, he is.
I'm operating at an information disadvantage since you've already begun a hearing of some kind. Kindly limit your testimony to the warrants that we're discussing here to the best of your ability.
Yes, sir.
Sort of think of them as distinct incidents. So, starting with warrant numbers 21W1598 through 1600, you allege that a victim, Christian Contreras, was robbed. Can you describe the probable cause to support that?
Yes, sir. So on January 7th, at 1120 Forestdale Lane in Norcross, Georgia, here within Gwinnett County, Mr. Contreras was walking his younger brother and sister to the bus stop. As he was walking back, Mr. Contreras reported he was approached by 3 Hispanic males. One of them was armed with a gun. They told him to give him everything he's got, his phone and his wallet. Mr. Contreras only had his iPhone 11, which was taken during the robbery. During the robbery, Mr. Contreras said he just looked at the ground, didn't get a good look at the suspects, but about 20 seconds after they walked away from him, he heard a gunshot. At the same time, or just subsequent to his robbery, across the parking lot, the same suspects encountered Mr. Cesar Valera. He was also walking home from dropping his kids off at the bus stop. He reported that as he's walking home, approximately 7 a.m., in front of the next apartment building, that the suspects approached him. One of them pistol whipped him in the head and as he was pistol whipped, a round was fired off by his head. Those same subjects took, all he had was his wallet, which contained about $80, his ID, and some Mexican pesos. Then that should cover a good majority of the
Okay.
We're just trying to, because there's another incident where the warrants go into that code.
I follow you. Let me
Okay.
ask a couple questions to make sure we're clear.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Contreras, you indicated there was a firearm that he saw. Was that ever pointed at him or brandished in any way?
Yes, it was pointed at him.
He indicated 3 people assailed him, but 1 gun. Was he able to give any description at all about the gun holder?
He was not. During the robbery, he said he initially just, once he got approached, he just looked to the ground and gave them what they wanted, which was his cell phone.
You indicated that the second robbery, referencing warrant numbers 21W1601 through 1603, occurred across the street in very quick succession. Did I get that right?
Yes, sir.
Is that address where the robbery occurred across the street, is that also within the confines of Gwinnett County, Georgia?
It is, yes.
You indicated that Mr. Verla, Berla, was struck. He was pistol whipped. Did officers observe a physical injury consistent with being struck with a hard metal object?
They did not note that in their report where they saw physical injury, but his report to me was that he was struck and a round was fired off.
Was he able to give any description at all of the assailants in his particular case?
So he just said they were all wearing black clothing and they spoke in a Honduran accent.
Just because I'm not sure, you may have said it, I missed it. Did he also indicate that he was assaulted by 3 assailants as well?
Yes, he did.
You indicated I'm going to paraphrase here, sort of you got 2 robberies and no real idea who did them. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Walk me through your investigation. Were you able to tie these 2 individuals now before the court to those 2 robberies?
Yes, sir. So these robberies that occurred on January 7th fell within a string of robberies that happened within a week's time span. Towards the end of that week, on January, I believe it was 13th, the 2 individuals here today, Mr. Rivera and Bonilla, were arrested by Norcross Police Department, along with another individual, Mr. Aaron Bonilla Ramos. Through that investigation, they were connected to the 700 block of warrants, which we previously testified to. And in these cases,
Detective George, we have to have independent evidence that Judge Terre is not familiar with the prior.
Okay.
If there's something from that case that matters to this case, you got to sort of import it in for me.
Yes, sir. So during those cases, I interviewed Mr. Rivera and Mr. Perez, and they had made admissions into taking part in other robberies that occurred within the same week's time span. They all happened around 7 a.m. in the morning, with various victims going to work. Because the MO matched this robbery, I conducted photo lineups with the victims of these cases. Mr. Valera was able to pick out Mr. Rivera and Mr. Perez as being 2 of the 3 assailants that robbed him, and he specifically said that Mr. Rivera was the one he remembers with the gun. And then I also conducted the photo lineup with Mr. Contreras. However, he was not able to pick out anyone in his photo lineups.
Okay. You indicated that Mr. Rivera Bonilla and Mr. Minor Perez made some incriminating statements about other robberies. Those robberies are not before the court right now. Is that correct?
Correct. They were previously heard in the first preliminary hearing.
Okay. And I want to be clear for the record and for Her Honor's sake, we referred to Mr. Contreras, that robbery, as 1598 and 1599. Those are warrants filed against Mr. Rivera Bonilla. did you also take warrants 1594 and 1955 against Mr. Minor Perez for armed robbery and aggravated assault as a party to a crime?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And same question, 1601, 1602, and 1603 are all against Mr. Rivera Venia. Did you swear out warrant 1596 and 1597 against Mr. Minor Perez as a party to crime in those cases for armed robbery and aggravated assault as well?
Yes, sir, I did.
Okay, that leaves us with warrants number 1604, 1605, and 1606 that are limited to Mr. Rivera Venia, as far as I can tell. Can you walk me through the probable cause to support those warrants, sir?
Yes, sir. So with this string of robberies, there was another robbery that occurred on January 12th at 1316 Hampton Ridge Road in Norcross, Georgia, here within Gwinnett County. It occurred around 6:15 a.m. The victims, two brothers, Glendo and Darvin, were walking to their vehicle to go to work. They stated about 4 Hispanic males approached them, began assaulting them. The two brothers did fight back because they did not want to give up what little they had. Mr. Glendo reported he was ultimately bit in the hand and sustained several injuries during the altercation. And Mr. Darvin was ultimately shot in the stomach. Both brothers reported they heard about 3 gunshots, one of them which exited Darvin's abdomen and exited out his buttocks. He was transported to the hospital and treated for his injuries, and he is recovering as we speak. Because of the MO fit, I conducted photo lineups with them of all 3, Mr. Rivera, Mr. Perez, and the other defendant, Mr. Brunellos. Darvin, the gunshot wound victim, was able to pick out Mr. Rivera as being present during the robbery. However, he could not specifically say that if Mr. Rivera had a gun or was the one that shot him, just that he was present during. And Mr. Glendo could not pick anybody out.
Okay. Did Mr. Glendo, I'm going to say Perez Chilel, Chilel, that's you're referring to as Glendo, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Did he have any property actually taken from him during this assault?
So he did not. His brother Darvin reported his wallet and cell phone was taken during the robbery.
Okay. Was Glendo actually shot or just present when shots were fired?
Glendo was not shot. He was present when shots were fired. He was bitten. He reported being bitten in the finger.
Was he able to identify that assailant or give any description of the person who bit him in the finger?
He was not. They just said they were Hispanic males with Honduran accents, all wearing dark clothing.
A couple of general questions. You've 3 different times now indicated that you conducted photo lineups. Did you personally do the lineups?
I'm sorry, I didn't. I put the lineups together, but Detective Pearson showed the lineups to the victims.
Okay. All right. And I wasn't super clear on the robbery of Mr. Contreras and the robbery of Mr. Verla. I know they happened in quick succession. Do you have any sense of how much time passed from when Contreras was robbed until Verla was robbed?
Contreras reported it was about 20 seconds after he was robbed, he heard the gunshot. It's about 20 seconds in between robberies.
Did all the events you've described to this court occur within the confines of Gwinnett County, Georgia?
Yes, sir.
Judge, that's all the questions I have for this detective at this time. Thank you.
Okay, and just for clarification purposes, and I may have just misheard incorrectly, I thought you said that those covered warrant numbers 01604 through 06, but it sounded like, based on his testimony, that it was actually 01603 through 01607.
You're right, Judge. I skipped over that one.
Okay.
But I believe there was evidence about.
Yes, he testified as to it, but the warrant number wasn't called, so.
Thank you, Judge.
Just want to clarify that.
You're correct.
Okay, and am I going to hear from Mr. Lewis is off mute, so I'll hear from Mr. Lewis first.
Thank you, Judge. First of all, let me start here. Officer Jurstad, the January 12th, yes, the January 12th, 2021 Hampton Ridge, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Hampton Ridge. Is Michael Perez involved in that?
No charges were taken out on him.
Okay, all right. Okay, I got it. So two Hispanic brothers are approached by four Hispanic males that are Honduran, is that right?
Correct.
One is bit, Gallardo, one is shot in the stomach, is that right?
Yes, sir.
Gallardo can't identify anybody, and if I got it right, the gunshot victim, he can only identify one of the four, is that right?
Correct. He identified Mr. Rivera.
Okay. Did Mr. Rivera, did you speak to Mr. Rivera after he was arrested?
After he was arrested, no, I did not go back to interview him.
Okay, so Rivera hasn't told you who the other three were that may have been involved, is that right?
Correct.
Okay. When you prepared the photo lineup, did you show the photo lineup of my client? Or did you have a photo spread for my client also? I mean, I understand you didn't show it, somebody else showed it, but
right.
Did you do it for him?
Yes. Yeah. For
Okay.
your client and for the other Aaron Bonillos, Ramos Bonillos, he was also shown, but neither your client or the other one were identified.
Okay, good. So let me go back to the January 7th, 2021. Where I'm assuming it's about 7 in the morning where three Hispanic males approach Christian Contreras and take his iPhone 11. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
Okay. He hasn't ID'd anybody, even though you prepared a photo spread and given him an opportunity. You, through somebody else, gave him an opportunity to look at the photo spread. Is that right?
Correct. He did not identify anybody.
Okay. The iPhone itself was never recovered. Is that right?
No, sir.
Okay, and you're tying my client, if I understand you correctly, you're tying my client to that robbery based on the fact that my client told you when he made a statement after you read him Miranda that they did some robberies at 7 a.m. And Mr. Burla, who's actually robbed of his wallet, does pick my client out of the photo spread. Is that right?
Correct.
Those are the two things that you think link my client to the Contreras robbery. His admission that he did some robberies at 7 a.m. and Mr. Burla's picking him out as one of the three Hispanic males when he was robbed of his wallet and ID. Is that right?
Yes, the fact that 20 seconds, Mr. Verlis' robbery was 20 seconds after Mr. Contreras' robbery.
Okay. Did Mr. Burla indicate when he selected my client out of the photo spread what role my client played?
He stated he saw your client second. He saw Mr. Rivera first with the gun and saw your client second.
Did my client have a gun at all?
He stated no, your client did not have a gun.
Okay, did he indicate of the three males Mr. Burla were talking about, the one that's robbed of his wallet, did he indicate how many of the three males had guns?
He just saw one gun with Mr. Rivera.
One gun. And did he indicate if the person that had the gun was also the person that made the demands for the money, wallet, or whatever?
He did not. He couldn't differentiate who was saying what. He saw Mr. Rivera with the gun, heard them speaking in Honduran. He was struck in the back of the head, and a round went off. So he couldn't differentiate which individual was telling him to give him.
Okay, I'm gonna get real persnickety about this day. Obviously, someone had to speak when Mr. Burla was robbed. Well, I don't even know if that's obvious, but I'm assuming at least one person spoke during the robbery of Mr. Burla when his wallet was taken. Is that fair to say? Somebody said, "Give it up," or "You know what this is," right? Something like that. Somebody. He indicated somebody spoke. Did he indicate all three spoke?
He could not indicate specifically which of the three spoke.
Okay, so when you say it like that, it sounds like only one of the three spoke. What I'm trying to figure out is when Mr. Burla says Honduran accent, does he hear one person with the Honduran accent or three people with a Honduran accent, whether they're talking to themselves or talking specifically to Mr. Burla?
He just reported he heard somebody with a Honduran accent.
I got it. Okay. So it's certainly possible that the gunman may have spoken to him in Honduran and the other two didn't speak at all. Is that fair to say? Is that possible?
It's possible.
Okay. Did you, Mr. Burla, and I'm gonna keep calling him robbery of the wallet because at least that's easy. iPhone robbery, wallet robbery. I know what we're talking about then. The wallet robbery, you indicated he was pistol whipped. Is that right?
That's correct.
Did you see the body cam video of the responding officer, which should have captured the injuries to Mr. Burla? Did you see that?
I did not see any. I could not tell any injuries based on the body camera footage.
Okay, so you did look at the body camera footage from Mr. Burla, but didn't see any injuries via that body cam. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay. Did you speak to Mr. Burla later on, independent of the body cam, face to face?
Yes, when after the photo lineups were conducted.
Fantastic. Did you see any injuries on Mr. Burla?
Not at that time.
Okay, and we're going to be fair here. Did you see him a week after the January 7th robbery, 2 weeks after the January 7th robbery, 2 months after the robbery?
Let me look back at what date I went over there. It would have been approximately 2 weeks after the robberies.
2 weeks after. You didn't see any residual injuries on him, like scars on his face or swollen eye or anything like that. You didn't see that. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Did he provide you with any medical reports or anything that would have reflected the extent of the injuries that he suffered on January 7th, 2021?
He did not.
Okay. Was his wallet or ID ever recovered?
No, sir.
Okay. Was the iPhone 11 that was taken from Christian Contreras, was that ever recovered?
No, sir.
Okay. Mr. Contreras indicated that he heard a gunshot about 20 seconds later. Did he indicate, and I just don't assume anything, did he indicate that the gunshot came from the direction that he saw the 3 Hispanic males go towards?
Yes. So that when he was robbed, the suspects went behind him, and that's where he heard the gunshot.
Okay, about 20 seconds later. When you had an opportunity to interview Mr. Christian Contreras?
Yes, sir.
Okay, and he didn't sustain any injuries, is that right?
No, sir.
He wasn't able to identify even the gunman, is that right?
Correct. He could not identify anybody.
Was he able to say if one of the perpetrators spoke Honduran or all 3 of them were speaking Honduran? Was he able to tell that?
He just said he heard somebody with a Honduran accent was telling him to give up his money and wallet.
Okay, somebody. So again, it may have been one person speaking even though there were 3 there.
Possibly, yes.
Did you ask Mr. Contreras where he's from?
I did not ask him where he's from.
Okay. Did anybody else tell you that Mr. Contreras is Mexican or Argentinian or Puerto Rican? Did anybody tell you that?
I do not know his ethnicity other than he is Hispanic. I don't know what country of origin he is from.
Okay, good. And the only reason I asked that is because he specifically told you, Christian Contreras, that the accent was Honduras. And I'm just trying to understand how Mr. Contreras would have known Honduran accent. Did he explain that to you, how he was familiar that it was Honduran?
He did not elaborate on how.
Okay, that's fine. That's fine. Mr. Burla, who's robbed for his wallet, did he indicate if he was from Honduras, or he dated a very pretty girl when he was a teenager that was from Honduras, or he once got chased by somebody and beat up by somebody that was from Honduras? Did he explain how he knew it was a Honduras accent?
He did not elaborate.
Okay. Okay, I don't have any further questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good morning, Investigator Dorset. How are you today?
Morning, good. How are you?
Doing well, thanks. Okay, so beginning with warrant number 21W1598. That is alleged to have occurred at around 7:15 on January 7th, 2021. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay, and at that point, it was likely dark outside. Is that fair to say?
Yes.
And as I understood your earlier testimony, Mr. Contreras indicated that 3 males approached him wearing dark clothing.
Yes.
Did he indicate whether or not their faces were covered in any fashion?
He did not indicate if their faces were covered.
Did he say specifically they weren't, or did he just not mention that?
He just did not mention it.
Did you ask him?
I did not.
And Mr. Contreras said that the 3 Hispanic males with a Honduran accent demanded his money and cell phone.
Yes.
Did he indicate how many of those men actually spoke?
He did not. He did not indicate that.
Okay. Did he indicate how many firearms there actually were?
He said that he only saw one.
And did he say there was any sort of lighting or anything that would help him identify any of the assailants if you were to later look at a photo lineup?
No, he said he did not get a good look at him, that he pretty much put his head straight down as he was approached and gave up his cell phone.
Okay. And I'm assuming he lived at that location. Is that right?
He did.
Contreras.
Yes.
Did Mr. Contreras indicate whether or not he'd actually seen any of the 3 men who assaulted him before that day?
He had not, no.
Okay, and I think Mr. Lewis asked you whether or not the cell phone was recovered, and you indicated it was not. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did Mr. Contreras have any sort of app that would track the location of his phone?
He did not.
Okay, so there was no Find My Phone app
He
or
didn't
anything
know.
like that? Okay, never recovered, so you don't know where it was located?
I have no clue.
Okay, and did you actually take Mr. Rivera Venia into custody?
I did not. He was taken in custody by officers that chased him by Norcross Police Department after that robbery on that day.
Okay. Do you know whether or not Mr. Rivera Venia had a firearm on him at the time of his arrest?
I know 2 firearms were recovered in the drain pipe of which he was hiding in.
Okay. And do you know, and I'm assuming, based on your testimony, that the cell phone that was the subject matter of the robbery of Mr. Contreras was not recovered in the location he was located. Is that fair to say?
Correct.
Mr. Contreras was not able to say which of the 3 men pointed the weapon at him. Is that also correct?
Correct.
So Mr. Contreras was not able to identify anyone? Is that fair?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. And did Mr. Rivera Venia ever make any statement indicating that he was present at the time of this robbery?
He did not know.
Did anyone else make a statement indicating he was present at the time of the robbery?
No.
Do you have any physical evidence indicating his presence at the time of the robbery?
No, just the photo lineup that was conducted by the other victim, Mr. Valeria.
Okay, but nothing with regard to Mr. Contreras.
Correct.
Okay, moving on to warrant 1601 with regard to Mr. Valera. Varela, I'm sorry. Mr. Varela was also a resident of that community, is that correct?
Yes, that apartment complex.
The photo lineup as well, is that correct?
Correct.
And was he able to select Mr. Rivera Venia out of that lineup?
Glendo was not, no.
And did you interview Mr. Rivera Venia?
I did at the time of his arrest, yes.
Did you ask him any questions specifically about the robbery that occurred on the 12th of January?
I did, yes. He said he did not have he had no knowledge of that incident.
Okay, and just to be clear, did you interview him with regard to the incident that occurred on January 7th that we discussed earlier?
Yes.
Did he acknowledge any participation in that robbery?
No, he did not.
Okay, moving on to, was Glendo wasn't able to identify the person who bit him, is that right?
Correct.
Was Glendo able to identify anybody in any of the lineups?
He was not.
And the lineups that were presented to Glendo and Darvin, were those the same lineups that
Yes.
Mr. Contreras saw?
Yes, they were all the same lineups that each one saw.
And do you know when they were presented to Glendo and Darvin?
It was on the 27th also.
So 2 weeks later for them, 3 weeks later for Mr. Contreras.
Well, they were all shown on the same. Well, yes, I guess because that was the 12th. Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I'm not trying to confuse things any further because I know this has been one of those things. So with regard to Darvin, did he indicate that the shot that struck him, did that occur after they began fighting?
Yes.
And was he able to identify which of the assailants actually had the weapon?
He could not identify which one had the weapon. No.
Okay, and he was shown the same lineup on the 27th.
Yes.
How many people was he able to identify in those lineups?
Just one, Mr. Rivera.
Rivera Venia,
Yes.
who's here today. Okay. But he wasn't able to say that that's the person who shot him.
Correct.
And were they shown 3 lineups or 4 lineups since there was a 4th alleged?
They were shown 3 lineups.
And how many people was Darvin able to, Darvin was only able to select Mr. Rivera Venia?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So did he say Mr. Rivera Venia was not wearing a face covering at the time?
He did not say. He just recognized him as being there.
Okay. And you indicated he was shot in the abdomen and the projectile exited his buttocks?
Yes, sir.
How significant were his injuries?
So at the time of the lineup, his intestines were in a colostomy bag outside of his body, and he had stitches from his mid-abdomen all the way down to his lower pelvis. He told me he was awaiting schedule for surgery to get everything put back in his body, but he said he was healing well.
Okay, and was anything actually taken during the course of the robbery of Darvin and Glendo?
Yes, Darvin had his wallet and cell phone stolen.
Was anything recovered?
No, sir.
Was anyone else interviewed who indicated that Mr. Rivera Venia participated in the robbery on either the 12th or the 7th?
No, sir.
And were you able to recover any, well, you don't know because the forensics haven't been done. So you, as far as you know, you haven't recovered anything that would tie Mr. Rivera Venia to the incidents, but that could change depending on what's found at the crime lab. Is that fair to say?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did Mr. Rivera Venia have a phone on him at the time he was arrested?
No, sir. There were 3 phones. 2 phones recovered in the drain pipe. 1 phone was recovered on Mr. Minor Perez.
Do you know if any of those phones have been associated with Mr. Rivera Venia?
No, sir.
So you don't know if anything of evidentiary value tying Mr. Rivera Venia to these incidents would have been located on any of those phones?
One of these cell phones I did search warrants on all 3 cell phones. 2 were because they're in the sewer. We're not able to get any kind of information from. 1 I was able to recover information from, and it was based on the photos on the phone, the selfie photos. It belonged to the 3rd suspect, Mr. Aaron Bonilla Ramos, and he had Facebook Messenger messages between him and Mr. Rivera on the morning of the 12th, just talking about, hey, we're going to go out and get started early this morning.
Okay, thank you. That's all I have at this time.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Any redirect, Mr. Williams?
Detective, do you know what country either Mr. Minor Perez or Mr. Rivera Venia was born?
I can look that up real quick. I did reach out to a colleague with the Homeland Security, and he was able to provide a little more. So Mr. Minor Perez is from Guatemala, and Mr. Rivera is from Honduras.
That's all I have, Judge. Thank you.
Any additional questions? Mr. Lewis?
No, Judge.
Okay,
I don't have anything further either, Your Honor. Thank you.
thank you. Any objection to this witness being excused?
No, Judge.
All right.
No objection.
Any additional witnesses, Mr. Williams?
Not on the question, probable cause, Judge. Thank you.
Mr. Lewis?
No evidence, only argument, Judge.
Mr. Estes?
No evidence, only argument, Your Honor.
Argument, Mr. Lewis?
Judge, respectfully, I'm going to argue that the charges as they relate to Mr. Minor Perez and Christian Contreras should be dismissed. I'm thinking that that is 1594, 1595. Mr. Burla, I do understand, has selected my client out of his photo spread, and obviously that could still be wrong, but that's the evidence that the court has here. But Mr. Christian Contreras does not select my client out of any photo spread. Just based on the evidence that you heard, Judge, not all the perpetrators are speaking. And of course, that last question, sometimes lawyers ask one question too many. I'm grateful for that last one he asked. Where's Mr. Minor Perez from? Not Honduras. So not all perpetrators are speaking during these robberies. And not all, well, maybe they are all speaking. We're not quite sure, but not everyone is speaking with a Honduran accent. My client shouldn't have any Honduran accent because he's from Guatemala. I think what's going on, Judge, and I think it may be clear to the court, that a lot of these perpetrators seem to be interchangeable, and I think that's the importance of this January 12, 2021 incident. My client's not involved in that, but it's like basically the same description. Four males, Honduran accent. We don't know if 1 is speaking, if 2 is speaking, 3 is speaking. But it seems to be like interchangeable players, and I think that's the primary role for preliminary hearings. Is there evidence ultimately against Mr. Minor Perez? Despite the fact that my client is saying that they're doing that he has participated in an AM robbery. I remember that testimony. Despite the fact that he's saying that he has participated in some AM robberies, what you did not hear Detective Joystad say is that he showed my client a photo of the victim, Christian Contreras, and my client has identified Christian Contreras. That never happened. He never identified any of these victims, and so he can just as easily be involved in a robbery with Mr. Burla and someone else as he can with Mr. Contreras and Mr. Burla. And I don't think there's ultimately enough evidence to tie my client to Christian Contreras, Judge. I think what the state is hoping that the identification by Burla, because it happened so quickly after the robbery of Mr. Contreras, and there's this gunshot that ultimately Mr. Burla's identification of my client in a photo spread, which could easily be wrong, is sufficient evidence enough to bind him over on Christian Contreras. And that's why I think, Judge, that's a little bit of a stretch for me. There's nothing that's ever recovered in terms of the cell phone, the iPhone 11 for Mr. Contreras, or the wallet with Mr. Burla. And then no other co-defendants that tie my client to the Christian Contreras armed robbery. So as to the Christian Contreras armed robbery, Judge, I would argue that 21W1594 and 21W1595 should be dismissed. I recognize that it may be a mistake, but there is enough evidence for the court to bind over 1596 and 1597 as they relate to the robbery wallet and Mr. Burla. Thank you, Judge.
Thank you. Mr. Williams, do you want to respond to that, or do you want Mr. Estes to go first?
I think I'm gonna have one consolidated argument, Judge.
Okay, go ahead, Mr. Estes.
Thank you, Your Honor. My argument is largely going to mirror the argument made by Mr. Lewis with regards to warrants number 21W1598, 1599, and 1600 relating to my client and the allegations against Mr. Contreras. He was not picked out of a lineup. There's no physical evidence tying him to the incident. Mr. Contreras could not locate anyone. There was nothing recovered from Mr. Rivera Venia to indicate that he was involved in that robbery. Not able to select him from the photo lineup. Basically, you have no evidence before you other than what the state contends is an identification of a similar incident occurring in close proximity at a close location. But there's nothing to indicate that Mr. Rivera Venia was present at the incident with Mr. Contreras. So I would ask that those three warrants, 1598, 1599, and 1600 be dismissed. I would submit on the other warrants.
You may go ahead, Mr. Williams.
With respect, Judge, to accept the logic of my colleagues as it relates to Mr. Contreras as a victim, state readily concedes he did not identify anyone, but the fact that a similar situated victim positively identified both these defendants within 20 seconds of robbery 1 and robbery 2 and within 50 feet would mean they appeared out of thin air at that point, or there's two robbery crews operating at the same time, neither of which is rational or reasonable. There's certainly probable cause to support the warrants against both Mr. Rivera Venia and Mr. Minor Perez as it relates to the allegations of robbery for Mr. Contreras. And I also respectfully disagree. Asking one question too many was not my problem here. We do have a Honduran assailant, Mr. Rivera Venia, but he's accompanied by other individuals who have been positively identified as it relates to this particular incident to be Mr. Minor Perez. So the court has heard sufficient evidence to bind all warrants over as alleged, with the exception of 21W1604. I don't think Mr. Glendo Perez Chilel had any property taken from him. It was his brother, so the property was taken off the brother's person. And so I'm going to ask the court to bind that over as criminal attempt to commit armed robbery.
Okay, so I'm going to start with Mr. Perez. As to warrant number 21W01594 through 21W01597, the court finds that sufficient probable cause has been established. I understand the argument made by Mr. Lewis. However, this is probable cause hearing, and the court finds that the amount of time that lapsed and the similarities in the two allegations is sufficient for a probable cause hearing. So all charges will be bound over, or all allegations will be bound over as charged. With regard to Mr. Rivera Venia, warrant number 21W01598 through 21W01603, court finds that sufficient probable cause has been established and those will be bound over as charged. Mr. Estes, for the same reason that I just said for Mr. Perez, is the reason I'm binding over the ones that were in dispute. As to warrant number 21W0164, that will be reduced to criminal attempt, and 21W01605 and 21W01606 will be bound over as charged. Is there anything additional?
No, Judge, thank you.